Hi, here's May and welcome to this video, which is part 2 of designing original characters, and this one is more about how I come up with the characters and how you can create characters that have some personality, character traits, and maybe even a backstory. In the last part, I talked more about the design and visual aspect, and in this part, I go more into the writing side of things. And in the background, you'll just see some time lapses of me drawing some of the OCs I'm also gonna talk about later on. But first, I'll just introduce some general things and tips you can use when coming up with original characters. And specifically, I want to start with dynamics because I designed 6 characters and also had in mind how they could interact with each other, because for personality traits and so on, most of them really depend on how the characters interact with other people. But let's start with talking about some dynamics, and for this you can look up different ship dynamics or maybe friendship dynamics and so on the internet. And I went to this site where you can create tier lists. I generally use this site many times when looking for dynamics or personality traits for characters. Can be very helpful, but in general there are lots of resources and you don't have to just use one dynamic for 2 characters or maybe even more. You can also just use multiple ones. It definitely makes sense to have an idea about how the character behaves with another character, but also with even more people around, in their family, with multiple friends, in a group of strangers, at a social event, and so on, but also on their own, of course. And this is all tied to the personality, which I'll talk about next. To create a believable character which others can sympathize or at least empathize with, it's good to include both good and bad traits. A perfect character can be boring and a too flawed character can be unappealing. It's all about finding the balance. Often you can get inspired by this from personality types and psychology in general. And what you can also use is that if a character has a positive trait, maybe the negative trait is caused by this positive trait being too extreme sometimes. For example, someone might be very kind, but then the negative trait is that they are naive, or someone might be a very relaxed kind of person, which is seen in a good way, but then if it's too much, it can also come off as lazy. What I like to look at for some personality traits is also the MBTI 60 personality types, since I'm just interested in them. I mean, my most recent videos were also about drawing the MBTI, and yeah, from those general descriptions of the types, you can create a believable character since they are based off research on humans and human psychology. But I wouldn't just rely on something like that type, except for if your plan really is to make character designs for the MBTI types. Some other personality type things where you can get inspired from for personality traits are the Enneagram types or the Big 5 types. And even though it's more visual, I also used aesthetics, looking at the aesthetics wiki, since oftentimes aesthetics can have an emotional connection somewhere in them. You can also create characters off of objects like crystals, or maybe zodiac signs or something like that, and have their personality be representing the meaning of those things. There generally are so many things you can create character designs from. I mean, I've seen so many people do flowers or star signs or planets or something like that. It can always help with coming up with the personality. And what you could also do is just create characters that are inspired by emotion. One representing happy, angry, sad, and scared, and so on. Yeah, you might know the movie Inside Out. And from that you can pull a lot for personality traits. Here I have some examples of what the characters for the emotions could have as personality traits. In general, it's good to start by just picking a few traits that instantly come to mind when you think of the OC and how you would describe them, and then you can go off from there and add more things to it. If you don't know what traits to pick, you can also Google some OC templates or in general search for personality traits. There are many cool resources. even including separation into good and bad traits on the internet. I also used some tier list makers for this as well. What I would advise you definitely know about the character is if they're more intro or extroverted or maybe an ambivert attitude towards others, and also if they mostly use logic or feeling when making decisions. Of course, they can also be a very balanced person in all of these things. Next up, let's talk about some character traits and how you can transfer them into the character design. It's very good to have something about the personality of your character stand out, and even better if you can connect it to the design. A very cheerful person might generally smile a lot and wear colorful, playful, brighter clothes, while a very reserved, quiet person might have a more sad expression, generally eyes turned differently. The outfit might be darker and less colorful, but of course you could also put a twist on all these stereotypes and turn it upside down. It would also result in a very interesting character, but it's always good to have an explanation why the character chooses to dress a certain way. If they get to choose what they wear, their outfit can also depend on their wealth and social status or environment or situation. For example, a school uniform. But even if you have very similar uniforms, it's good to make each character maybe wear those uniforms differently depending on their personality. As I said, for school uniforms this can be very useful, but also for idol outfits or something like that, stage outfits for a cast of characters. I like a lot of idol anime, and for example in Idolish 7 or Ensemble Stars, even though they might have the same outfit, oftentimes there's some unique thing about outfits, or maybe the outfit might be pretty different for each one, like the cuts and how long the sleeves are and so on, but the color palette stays the same, or each character has just white outfits, but then their color, especially for Idol 7, this is the case a lot of the time. And I also recently watched Kyutai Defense Club, and it's a very funny show, but even there they all have these transformation outfits, and what I found very interesting was how the length of the pants was changed for each character. In general, what you can do for making uniforms fit to the personality of a character is that a organized character might have their shirt tucked in and everything just sits perfectly, while a relaxed or more chaotic character might wear their things very loosely. A more rigid character might wear longer sleeves or pants and tighter clothes, while a cheerful or more playful character might have shorter pants, skirts, whatever, and more loose flowy clothing. Adding an accessoire with some meaning, like a necklace from someone special, can be very helpful too, but basically using patterns and colors while keeping the personality in mind, having those patterns or colors be meaningful and contribute to conveying what the character is about is very important. Yeah, with color psychology or just personality traits that are related to color, you can also come up with very interesting designs that fit the personality of the character. Next, let's talk more about hobbies, interests, and also the profession of the character, if they go to school or college or have a job. Hobbies are also very important, and they can of course tie a lot together with the personality of the character. A more social person might have more social hobbies like team sports or hanging out with friends, going shopping, and in general more outside of their home. While a more introverted person might have hobbies where they can spend time on their own at home, like reading, drawing, or playing an instrument like the guitar. It's good to pick a few activities, and for this you can look on the internet again, and again there's lots of inspiration. It's also a good idea to have a balance for some hobbies. For the hobbies, maybe one hobby is more on the sports side, and one might be where they spend more time on their own, and one also with others. But this can of course vary for each character with their personality and their lifestyle. And what's more related to human OCs, which is generally my focus in case you couldn't tell from the designs I made. In a more realistic world setting, you can also have jobs and so on for your characters, and they can also overlap with the hobbies and their interests. Some people do what they are interested in at their job, or in college, or even in school. They might go to a club related to their interests and hobby, while other people also have a completely different job from what they like to do. If your character has a job, it's good to know if it's a more social or less social job and where they work, with who, how long each day, since it probably makes up a big part of their life. And if your character is in college, you can pick a major for them. And if they are in school, you can ask yourself the question if they have a special role or club activities. They might be the class president, and there also are so many anime about school clubs. You can really see that even though some characters have one common interest, they all are very different in their personalities. Idol anime is like this as well. All the characters like singing, but their personalities are very different, because it just makes for some more interesting dynamics and a more interesting story. And story is what I'll talk about next, but I won't get into storytelling advice too much since I don't have much experience with it. But if you have a backstory for your character explaining why they are the way they are, or maybe just an idea for a specific scene, how they would act there, it can really add to your OC. But you don't have to become a writer, of course. Since this video focuses more on the personality or writing side, I thought I'd just mention it here. But if you are more focused on the design, that's also no problem. You can also just design your OC while not paying attention to personality and so on. It's all up to you how detailed you want to be with this. Lastly, I'll also just talk about some character inspirations, which is also a thing you can use for your own OCs. If you want to, just like with using references for art, which is very important for artists, you can do the same with characters and their personalities. I find this very fun because you get to think about other characters you really like and what about them you like and what you want to get inspired by for your own characters. For this, it's important to not copy one character and just redesign it, while the personality and everything else stays the same. That is not the idea of an original character. Instead, you can take multiple characters, and it's best if they also are from multiple shows or games or something like that. Whatever you really feel like your character should be inspired by. It really is just like art and combining references to draw your own art instead of just copying from one reference. Now I'll go on to talking about my own characters and how I applied what I just talked about. In general, the characters were inspired by colors a lot, and you can see here how I used some traits that can be related to the different colors, also for the personality of the characters. And now I'll first talk about the dynamics in general, because I had these 3 couples kind of as ideas, but I'm very loose with the characters in the story. I have an idea and also some scene ideas in my head for all of the characters, but I don't want it to be like, yeah, it's set in stone, this is the story. I just want to be very free with them. I only wanted to mainly design them and come up with personalities, but not a backstory, because I could also imagine these characters being in like a otome game, which I've also been interested in recently, and then they would not be in love with each other, but I had fun coming up with different dynamics that would fit the characters, so I'll talk about those here and what kind of couples they would be. And after talking about the dynamic, I'll then quickly talk about each of the characters, their personality, hobbies, and so on. First, we have the first couple of the blue and purple character, whose names are Mizu and Rai. And for the dynamics, I'm just gonna mention the dynamic, and first attribute will be for Mizu, the second for Rai. Some dynamics Mizu and Rai would be inspired by is cares too much and doesn't care, would literally die for them, and that's not necessary. Serious and chaotic. And now some general dynamics is that they would be childhood friends, and everyone around them knows they love each other except for them. They don't realize it, and they would fit the friends to lovers trope. Then the next pairing I'm gonna talk about is Chio and Hira. They have this pink and gold color combination, but also a little bit of pink and turquoise, since Hira, also his second outfit is a turquoise dress. But for the colors, I mainly went off the eye colors to describe which color each character has. So for Hero it would be gold, and their dynamics would be dog eats dog, and in general they fit the basically married trope, best friends with sus behavior and having an established relationship. They basically are very open about it. And Hero also likes to sing, and for this I saw this trope, which was hears the other sing once and never recovers, and I imagine that Chio could fall in love with Hiro when he heard him sing, or just that he's very fascinated by his singing. The last couple I'm going to talk about is Yumi and Shin, which they had this kind of black and white color combination, but then also turquoise and pink, and for them their dynamics would be popular and loner. And in general, I wanted them to be two wholesome people. In general, all my characters, I want them to be kind of wholesome. It's just what I like. And then they would be each other's first love, and some kind of trauma would bring them together. And also they would never stop showing off their significant other if they can. Yeah, that's just for some shipping dynamics I wanted to use for the characters. And now I'll talk about each character, and I also, while doing this, show you the Meet the OC illustrations I did, and I won't read everything from there. I'm just gonna add some things to it. So on the Meet the OC illustrations you can already see their age, interests, hobbies, some items they use or are important to them, what they like and don't like, what their personality is like and what their personality is like. What I'm gonna add now is their MBTI personality type, and then I'm also gonna mention the aesthetic I used as inspiration for each of the characters. And for fun I thought I'd just mention a fruit for each character, because at some point I was like, maybe I could create cute stickers with a fruit and the character, or yeah, I just really liked associating fruits with them for some reason. And lastly, I also mentioned some characters that each of them is inspired by. Let's start with the first one, which is Mizu. His personality type would be the INFJ, the advocate. And you can see in the likes and dislikes things basically what are some traits that are often related to each of the MBTI types I mentioned, so you can already get an idea of what kind of things those personality types value. Now, for the aesthetic I used for this character as inspiration was Sparkle Core. Then the fruit I would associate with Mizu is a blueberry. And what I also mentioned is the meaning of the name, since I also had a lot of fun coming up with the names. I didn't even talk about the names before, but names of course also make up a big part of your character when you want to introduce your character, and it makes sense to look at meanings of names if you want your name to really fit your character. And if you don't just have a name that instantly pops up into your mind when you think about the character, which it didn't happen for me, so I just looked up a lot of names and my favorite ones. For Mizu, the meaning of this name is water, and yeah, it really fits with him being a rather calm character and in general his color being blue. The fruit that would fit with him to me would be a blueberry, also because of blue mainly. Some characters that Mizu would be inspired by from Haikyuu Suga or Suga Warakoshi, then from Idol 7 Sogo Osaka, from Genshin Impact Zingsho, then from number 6 Shion, and from Ensemble Stars Rai and Aichi. Now onto the second character, Rai. His personality type would be the ENTJ, but I'm not sure if it's really E or I, but I think it's E, since he's a very like business person. He really gets things done and isn't afraid to tell others what he thinks. The aesthetic he'd be inspired by is Space Core, also astronomy is one of his interests. Then the name Rai means thunder, and that really fits with his personality to me. He can be very blunt and so on. For Rai, the fruit he would represent or be inspired by is a grape, probably a purple grape, since his color is purple. And lastly, some characters that he would be inspired by is Tsukishima from Haikyuu, Ten Kujo from Idol 7, Ayato from Genshin Impact, Tsukigami from Starmie, and lastly Ibara and Shu from Ensemble Stars. The third character I'm going to talk about is Chio. He's an ENFJ, and his aesthetic would be the kidcore aesthetic, very bright and colorful. Also his accessoires, mainly his necklace, is inspired a lot by this. The name Chio means 1,000 generations or worlds, and for this I thought it kind of fit Chio since he likes diversity a lot and looking at lots of different things and so on. But for this meaning, to be honest, it wasn't like that the name had that significant meaning. It was just that the name mainly sounded really nice, so I wanted to use it. For Chio, his fruit would be a strawberry, since it's also part of one of his designs. On his pants there's a small strawberry. And lastly, some characters that Chio would be inspired by are Oikawa from Haikyuu, Gahiru Sakiguchi from Bishonen Tanteidan, and then Kazunari from A3, which is Act Addict Actors, a game, but also a anime. Then from Genshin Impact Toma, and lastly from Ensemble Stars Chiaki and Nazuna. And next we're gonna talk about Hira, who would be an INFP, and the aesthetic Hira is inspired by is nostalgia core. Also, since he's a singer, I thought it would kind of fit for him to have this nostalgic vibe about him. He also plays the guitar. And his name means diamond, which, yeah, it's a pretty meaning, definitely, but it doesn't necessarily completely fit him. I thought that some kind of flower would probably fit him better, but the word diamond, it's also a very beautiful thing, so I just went with Hira. A fruit for him would be the banana, because of, yeah, gold mainly, but yeah, he's also very sweet, so why not? I just went with the most standard fruits, I think. At first I was also thinking maybe orange, but it'd probably be like too sour, if that makes sense. For some characters that inspire Hira, there's Yamaguchi from Haikyuu, Riku Nanase from Idolish 7, Rui from Tsukiyata, and Ira and Mika from Ensemble Stars. Now on to talking about Shin, who was the character inspired by the black color, but also kind of a little bit of pink. For him, he's an INTP, and the aesthetic he'd be inspired by is the lo-fi aesthetic. He also really likes to listen to music, and in general spends a lot of time in his room, maybe playing video games and so on, and I really thought that would fit the lo-fi aesthetic since so many people like to listen to lo-fi music while they just do stuff in their room and so on. I'm definitely one of them. The name Shin means true, and I thought that would fit with Shin being very realistic and honest about what he thinks. A fruit for him would be the raspberry, which isn't always completely sweet, but sometimes can also be sour, and somehow that kind of fits with him. And finally, about the character inspirations for Shin, we have Kenma from Haikyuu, then Albedo from Genshin Impact, Nezumi from Number 6, Kuga from Starmie, and from Ensemble Stars, Ritsu and Himaru. And let's move on to the final character for the video, which is Yumi. And to me, Yumi's personality type would be an ISFJ. He'd be inspired by the happy core aesthetic, in general, very kind towards others and caring, and focused on that everyone around him just feels good. His name means dream. Well, the word Yume with an E in the end means dream, but I wanted him to be named Yumi since that sounded nicer to me. A fruit for him would be an apple, probably like a green apple if I wanted to match the color. It kind of fits him since he also likes to work out and so on, take care of plants. I thought it seemed like this very fresh kind of aura he has, and that fits with apples. But now let's finally talk about characters that inspired Yumi, which are Asahi from Haikyuu, Mitsuki from Idolish 7, Changyun from Genshin Impact, Aoi from Tsukiyata, and from Ensemble Stars, Nikki and Izumi. And yeah, with that, I've talked about all of the characters, which I hope you found interesting. I certainly had a lot of fun with coming up with all of these characters and getting to research different things like aesthetics, personality traits, names, and characters I liked anyway. So yeah, all of these different things you can pull from for characters are very cool to me, and maybe in the future I also make some character designs just inspired by objects or something like that. But for now, these are the 6 characters I came up with, and I hope what I mentioned in the beginning helps you with coming up with your own original characters, and maybe you'll get inspired by also talked about with my own characters. You can also now mention which of the characters you would like to be friends with the most, which one you like the most, or which one maybe reminds you of another character you know from somewhere. In general, if you have any more ideas to add, which can help a lot with coming up with characters. That's it for the video. Thanks a lot for watching and have a great day. Goodbye.